Hello, and welcome to another episode of Scavenger Life. This is episode number 172 at scavengerlife.com. And today, Jay and I are sitting down and talking with my mom, another eBay seller, about buying and selling and identifying fabric.
So today we wanted to talk about fabric because we've been selling fabric for about 2 years now, and we've actually bought several big lots of fabric. So people on the blog have been asking, well, how do I find fabric? When I find it, how do I tell if it's good or bad?
How do I tell what it is?
Yeah, cotton, wool, and also who buys it and why. So if you've been buying and selling fabric, and I think we kind of learned from you, so we wanted to know your experience with fabric.
I've always been kind of a textile nut. And I, learned to sew back in the 60s in home ec class. It was a requirement that you learn to sew.
Yeah.
But I have to say, my mother, who didn't know how to sew, had a great eye for fabric in clothes that were already manufactured. And there's something called the hand. And when you talk about fabric, you talk about the feel in the hand.
Yeah.
And over the years, I've gotten to be proficient enough that I can literally put my hand on a piece of fabric and tell this is good fabric.
Right.
And it's something that's, I don't know, you can teach it if you have your person there and you can say, feel this versus this. But I think everybody can tell when they're touching a piece of fabric, there's a tactile sense of it feels cheap.
Yep.
Yeah.
It feels slick. It feels light. It feels
synthetic or
stiff. Yeah. Or, there's some fabrics that are manufactured specifically to have a stiffness to them, but it's just something you develop over time. But I think that, back in the 70s, we were all sewing. Everybody I knew sewed. It was cheaper to make a garment. You could buy a beautiful piece of fabric, make your own garment, and have something really unique and wonderful. But today, because clothes are basically so cheap and they're disposable, by the time you buy a good piece of fabric and a pattern and put the time into making the garment, it's not worth it. You can go to TJ Maxx and buy it.
So, when we go to thrift stores, you'll just see boxes of those, what do they call?
Bolts of fabric?
No, just when you can... It's a thing that shows
you
the
how
pattern.
To...
the pattern. Yeah.
Like butter.
Basically, no one cares about them. So people actually would buy those and make clothes?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
How long would it take to make a dress?
To make what I call a simple shift dress with a jewel collar, sleeveless.
Yeah.
You could probably cut that pattern out and stitch that dress together in 2.5 hours.
And it's done?
Yeah. If it was not lined.
Right.
Yeah, if it was uncomplicated.
Wow. Just uncomplicated, zipper down the back.
Wow.
I would say 2.5 to 3 hours.
So people wouldn't make fun of you to have a homemade dress? That wouldn't be
well,
you poor...
but also but what we find is when we're going to the thrift stores and you see clothes from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, a lot of them are homemade.
But the difference is, if you were a wealthy woman, upper class woman, you had a dressmaker. Yeah. You had someone who actually made dresses for you.
Yeah.
And those dresses were extremely well made. So you would see a picture in Vogue magazine and you would take it to your dressmaker and she would kind of create this dress out of nothing for you.
Right.
And those dresses are exquisite.
Yeah. So I'd like a little perspective. So, we aren't talking like the 20s. We're talking about like the 60s or 70s. People still bought clothes in stores, right?
But the 60s and the early 60s and 70s was a really big DIY period. Mm-hmm. Everybody was doing crafts, not the kind of crafts you think of now, but we were doing leather working, we were sewing our bell bottoms, we were ripping jeans up the side and putting in colorful fabric at the bottoms. We were making things you couldn't... The fashion manufacturers hadn't really caught up to the hippie movement yet, so you had to kind of create your own look, and that was pretty well respected.
Yeah.
I mean,
I do find it interesting too. There weren't a lot of brands, a lot of clothes that are older that we call a vintage.
Right.
There weren't a lot of brands like the brand on it would just be more like
from the department store or something.
Right. Well, those clothes were created, they had a manufacturing facility and they were private labeling for Saks Fifth Avenue or a name brand store, Macy's, Montgomery.
It's just so interesting to think of a time before, I guess, companies hadn't thought about branding. It's so interesting.
I mean, there were things like Chanel was a brand.
Well, and Talbots.
Buy,
I would say Talbots and Appleseeds and those brands that were always...
The Villager.
Yeah.
That was a big one.
Huge.
Anytime I see Villager, I get
huge.
John Mayer
of Norwich.
Yeah.
Bobby Brooks.
I mean, hadn't those been very rare, or
were they
those
expensive?
Were really expensive?
I remember when I was in junior high and Villager was the big name, and they were relatively expensive.
Yeah,
because I know I only had a couple of shirts, and I had culottes. I had this one outfit. It was
what the hell is a culotte?
A culotte?
Are they like little pants? Or
no,
something?
It was like a skirt, but it had a split, so it was really two legs, and
it was like a wrap.
No, those were wrap skirts.
Okay.
I mean, it was culotte. You have to look it up.
It's just a culotte. I don't know what to tell you.
How do you spell it? K-U?
C-U-L-O-T-T-E.
Okay.
I'm sure someone's selling them on eBay. We should look it up.
Do it on Wikipedia.
So I had burgundy poplin culottes and burgundy and pink was a big color combination, and I had a little Peter Pan collar pink Oxford blouse that went with it.
It's so funny because I've heard other women talk about John Mayer and Villager,
right,
and they remember exactly what it looked like. They're like, I remember buying it. It was a whole thing. I had it, on my wall before I bought it. Like it was a whole thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's so weird now where clothes is almost like disposable.
Like you said,
it's almost disposable.
I mean, I've said this joke before. I really don't. I almost never have to. I could have a choice to not wash my clothes and just always be getting clothes.
They
and just throw them away.
I've known people to do that.
They are so badly made.
Right.
Yeah.
They don't hold up when you wash them. You go to Target, you buy a t-shirt for $15, you wash it, it's gone.
Yeah.
It will never look the way it did on the rack when you brought it home an hour before.
Right.
Never.
Right.
And plus, they just make so much of it now, which I don't understand. It's almost like no one buys clothes at retail anyway.
Right.
They just wait for it's 50% off sale, even new.
Well, Kohl's, I find this amazing. Everything in Kohl's is on sale all the time. So
what's the point?
It's like, why don't you just price it that way?
Yeah.
I'm looking at a T-shirt and it says it's $36. Well, it's 75% off, so it's whatever it is, $8. I'm like, why don't you just charge $8?
Because they want you to know you're getting a deal.
Well, first of all, I would never pay $36 for this rag anyway.
But it probably only cost them 25 cents to get made in wherever, China,
Sri Lanka.
Yeah. So we have there's a fabric store in this town. It's next to ours. We live in the South, and it's run by this old couple. And we went in there once just because we wanted to kind of just learn about fabric, and plus, you don't see fabric stores a lot anymore. Like small ones,
independent
like
ones, not Joann's.
I can remember he told me, back in the day, especially in the South, there were fabric manufacturers
like wool.
Like that's what hired a lot of people, and they were making wool and all this really nice fabric. That stuff does not exist anymore.
No.
So is that the kind of places where you guys would buy the fabric?
Well, when I first came to New England and I was doing a lot of sewing and making a lot of my own clothes, I would go to Chinatown, and I got to be friendly with this man from Egypt who had this little hole-in-the-wall shop, and he took a liking to me, and he had the most exquisite fabric. And he was getting his fabric from New York, which Boston's always been considered like the little baby sister, I guess, of New York. So anyway, once I got to know him and I would buy things from him, he had a special room in the back. and he would have select pieces of fabric that he only showed certain customers. So I would go there and he would say, "Oh, look what I got." And I could buy the most amazing things there for a few dollars a yard, which you just couldn't buy anywhere else.
I remember some of the drapes in our house on Willow Street. Do you remember those drapes? They're like this gorgeous fabric.
Oh, that Waverly fabric.
Yeah, I remember that.
Those were stunning. They were dark green.
Yeah, with like a floral.
And they had a floral vine.
Almost Middle Eastern looking or something.
Right.
It says were handmade or?
Actually, our neighbor made those drapes for us.
Really
and then I made the tie backs. And I actually had put white piping around this tie back and made matching covered buttons.
What happened to those curtains when we moved?
I have no idea.
Just those were, I mean, I remember those vividly.
That was the first time I actually did a real decorated room, that we had a house that I could decorate.
That was very
So it'll be a surprise that a lot of this stuff is new to me, because I've never seen that kind of culture of people making clothes. Like my mom didn't make clothes. I guess
my mom used to make clothes for our dolls.
Wow,
that is how insane she is. Wow. Our Cabbage Patch dolls had handmade dresses.
Wow.
I just looked at those clothes recently.
You still have those?
Yes.
They're gorgeous.
Oh my God.
They're beautiful.
The buttons on them are so tiny. I don't even know how I sewed them on the dresses.
And they're like mother of pearl buttons. Like, they're gorgeous.
So the way I've seen this culture is we will go to a thrift store and, I love to look in the corners. It's like you talked about. I love to look where people aren't looking.
Right.
And there'll always be a box or like a tub, and you'll pull it out and it's full of fabric.
Right.
Either swatches or big pieces. And I guess it's because someone died or someone
downsized.
And someone from the 60s or 70s, they just gave away all the fabric that they've gathered.
And the fabric we find is that old sometimes.
And that's what this stuff is.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is that there's definitely a culture of fabric hoarders. There are people like me who I just love it. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I want it
in a box.
I want it, and I'll take it out and look at it once a year, and I'll daydream about all the projects I'm going to do with it. I have a box now of fabric that I'm hoarding.
I do too. It's small, but
it's small, but it's there. And I think the DIY movement that we talked about earlier has really fueled a lot of the purchases now in fabric, because people are doing small scale projects. They're doing little handbags, they're
little pillows,
little pillow covers, or they're doing a little valance, or they're doing a little this, and they're looking for that special little piece. So even a yard's worth of fabric is saleable.
Yes. So when we found our first bin, and it was, there were pieces, that were small. They weren't even
like 2 feet
a yard, and I was like, this is trash. And Ryan's like, no, we'll sell it. And we started selling them individually.
Yep.
And we could sell, a 2x2 foot piece of like wool fabric for $20.
There are quilt makers. I sell to people in Ohio, because that's the big
quilt making
like Shaker, like Mennonite and Amish. They make quilts, and the squares are not big, so they don't need a big piece.
Is this because it's hard to find that kind of fabric now? If you wanted to go, like, can you go to a Michael's and buy like good fabric, or?
I just don't know if it's the quality and the prices. Like for wool or silk, the price is going to be higher than what we're charging. I think.
I mean, I look at and I do a lot of upholstery fabric and drapery fabric, and I love Waverly. They're classic. Their patterns are classic.
High quality.
They're high quality.
That a company?
It's a brand.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's a brand.
And they've really
fabric.
branched out into the home decor. But the older Waverly fabrics, some of them are printed in England. The cottons are out of
We've
this
sold some
world.
Waverlys, and people look for that.
It's the patterns and things that Waverly has designed, and a lot of them are based in historical reference.
Like the Williamsburg, I think we have a piece of a colonial Williamsburg like reference, but I think it's made by Waverly.
Right. And those pieces, they're never going to be made again.
Yeah.
And maybe somebody just wants to do the front of a pillow cover, or maybe they have a chair seats don't take a lot of fabric. You can do a couple of chair seats. So I find that those do really well. I also look for the funky 60s, 70s pop art Even if it's a little bit sleazy feeling, sometimes people just want that
color.
Weird, psychedelic.
Sometimes,
even if it's polyester.
Sometimes we will sell the nylon or polyester, but just because it's got a crazy pattern
or
you can
color.
never find.
Right. And I guarantee you, the weirder it is, the faster it will sell.
Yeah.
Because somebody's looking for that.
I think I'm always surprised at, when we list a bunch of fabric, how well it sells. Like, I always forget. I'm like, oh, all this fabric, we have so much. It sells like crazy.
I think I had gotten down in my inventory and I hadn't listed fabric for a while. And if I told you how much fabric I have to list, you would be astonished. But I decided to list 25 or 30 pieces. And I think in less than 2 weeks, I had sold more than half of it.
Yep.
And it just flew.
And a lot of it goes overseas because overseas
In England.
they don't have the same fabric.
Right.
A lot of it goes to Australia.
Yep. And I also find that the wool,
yes,
it's so hard to find pure wool.
good quality, plaids and
right. And here's the hard part. A lot of times wool will have an added fiber, and I know in a lot of my listings, especially in sweaters and coats and jackets and things, you will look in the older garments, for example, and it will be 85% wool, 15% nylon. There will be some proportion.
Yeah.
The proportion of nylon is usually much smaller. And people think, oh, it's a wool blend. Well, it is a wool blend, but what's good about that particular combination is nylon gives strength and durability to the wool. That wool will last much, much longer. It won't stretch out of shape as badly. It won't pill as badly. It's a much more durable fabric woven with the nylon than it would be if it was just wool on its own.
A lot of those are like LL Bean, like we call them rag wool.
Rag wool.
Kind of a heather gray or, different colors. I find that with those a lot.
And unfortunately, you have to list that as a wool blend. The wool blend that's not as great is the wool with acrylic. Acrylic gives the wool kind of a slickness.
It's a cheap feeling.
It's a cheap feel. Yeah. Now, sometimes it can be okay, but I prefer the wool and nylon. Even the wool, you don't see wool and polyester very much.
Right.
Sometimes you see wool and a viscose.
That's like rayon.
I don't know.
Isn't it rayon?
I think that is a rayon. It's not viscose. It's viscose.
Yeah. It's a weird.
And that's an older. You don't see that much in the newer fabrics anymore. Yeah. The other fabric I love is linen.
Yes.
Because the old linens, the more it's washed, the better it gets, and it has just a wonderful organic feel to it.
Yes.
The other fiber that I find a lot, and it's often mixed with linen, is rayon. And rayon is an organic fabric. It's not.
Rayon is? Really?
Yeah.
What?
It's made.
What's it made out of?
It's made from a plant.
That's shocking to me.
Shocking.
I love the feel of rayon, like a rayon
Rayon's
skirt.
been around since the 1900s.
Yeah.
And sometimes the all rayon stuff from the 20s and 30s is fabulous.
I had no idea.
And
I thought it was
no, it's not synthetic. It's organic.
That is news to me.
It's a cellulose fiber made from wood pulp.
Yeah.
Weird.
Wow.
And it's very durable.
Yeah.
And it can be dyed amazing colors. And you can almost always tell. Once you get to know what rayon feels like, you can almost always tell if something has rayon in it.
Yes,
you said earlier about, having that hand, being able to just kind of feel. And that's, a lot of people are, like, this sounds great. I want to sell this stuff.
Right.
How do I know if it's real or not? And a lot of times I say that too. Just like once you get to know the feel of silk or wool, it's so easy.
The real deal fabrics, the wools, the linens, the pure cottons, the silks. You will, after a period of time and buying it and feeling it and handling it and touching it, you will develop a sense of the feel. Silk is very hard because silk can be woven in so many different ways.
That raw silk feels very different.
Has a lot of slubs in it. It's a thicker fabric.
It feels kind of sticky.
It feels dry. It's got this weird dryness
to it. But a real finely woven silk, like in a silk scarf,
It's silky. Like
that's very silky.
Yeah.
But there are some polyesters out there
They
that
fool
are
me.
such good renditions
Yeah.
that they're almost impossible to tell
Right.
the difference.
So do you ever do burn tests, or that's what we always tell people
To do a burn
you know,
test
if you
to
can-
know if it's synthetic or not.
I actually don't.
Yeah.
You probably know it well enough, though. But there have been times with silk where I'm like, I can't tell if this is polyester.
Right.
I really can't tell. So if it's a large enough piece of fabric, you can snip a little.
But if it's
edge
a
off.
pillow, if it's
No,
a pillow sham,
no,
you can't do that.
that. But
I'm really lucky because living in New England was a huge textile
Yes.
market. I mean,
Yeah.
the brick mills
The
are
mills.
still in existence now, and they just turned out the most amazing fabric, and they did in the South as well. But once whaling and fishing and stuff died off, then in the early part of the industrial age, they started with the mills, and I've just been fortunate to find bolts and bolts and bolts of fabric in the thrift stores. You know, they came out of so many people worked in the mills.
yeah.
I was lucky enough to have a relationship with a woman who was 82 years old. Her mother died at 102.
Wow.
The 82-year-old was cleaning out the mother's apartment and came to me and struck up kind of a friendship with me, and she allowed me to go to the mother's residence and pick and choose what I wanted from the estate.
Wow.
And after I had done that and filled 2 carloads of stuff, she came to me a few weeks later and she said, "Oh, I just looked under the eaves in the attic and I found this fabric and I don't know." And it was vintage bark cloth in bolts, because her mother worked in the mill and she worked in the mill. And they had just gotten this fabric and had never used it and it had been in storage all this time, and it was beautiful.
Yeah.
Now explain bark cloth.
Bark cloth, I'm not really sure what the fiber content is, but I think it's
can be different
a
things,
lot of
right?
cotton, but I think there may be some rayon in it.
But it has a texture.
texture, that's
It has a
like,
texture.
like bark.
It's
you know?
very,
Like rough.
it's rough, it's slubby, it has a lot of slubs in it. If you look at it carefully up close, you'll see that it has almost a basket weave.
Yeah.
But a tight basket weave.
Yeah.
And it took dye beautifully. So the colors and patterns
they had a lot of
that they
patterns.
used in bark cloth, and it was super popular in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of early atomic age patterns
Right.
with it. It's
But they would make, seat covers,
Right,
pillows,
draperies.
draperies.
big for draperies.
I noticed that as we list a fabric, we're good about kind of the basic stuff. You
Yeah.
know, how it's made, that kind of
Right.
thing. But you'll always tell us these like weird words that I've never heard before. I can't remember
different-
the last. Just how it feels or looks. Or,
Yeah, or you'll say it's called this if it's got this texture, and I'm like, I never would have known that.
Like the watered taffeta.
watered taffeta. What? I don't know. I would never have known that. If you Google that, you'll see what it's kind of that shiny,
Moiré.
moiré pattern that looks like royalty would
Right.
wear it or something.
Well, it looks like water stains.
Right.
In a very specific pattern.
Yeah.
So the other way that we've been able to find a lot of fabric, which I love, is when we find like a designer, like an interior designer, is
Right.
either unloading extra stuff or they've gone out of its business.
Yeah,
But
just
we've
get
bought big
bolts.
bolts of a lot of it's upholstery.
Right.
It's
Thick,
fabric,
yeah.
and
Designer
and this will
stuff.
be like 10 yards, a whole bolt. I mean, those are really good.
Those are
deals
worth
as well.
hundreds of dollars.
You know what's
Yeah.
funny though? Because I have bolts as well, and some of it's just gorgeous stuff. But I have found that the really large bolts are much harder to sell.
as the full bolt.
Then I do better with things that are 1 to 4 yards
Really?
than the big
Yeah,
bolts.
they don't. The big bolts
They don't move.
sell as often, but when they do, it's
Right.
a good high price.
Right.
So
Because
you're
it's got to be a person that needs 10 yards. I mean, 10
Right.
yards is that's
30
like
feet.
if you're doing
Yeah.
a whole big thing of drapes. you
Right.
know.
yeah, or
And that's what-
two couches,
Right,
or
and that's what
something.
you need it
Right.
for.
Yeah,
I did sell a really unusual piece of black toile, And what was unusual about it was the pattern.
What's it called? It's toile.
Toile. It's the
I'm probably saying it wrong, and I know what you're talking about.
It's the French country scenes that are printed on fabric.
Yeah.
Oh, so what's it? TWOLL?
It's TOILE.
Oh.
See, I was calling that tulle.
Cool.
Yeah, tulle is like net.
It was netting, yeah. I just saying it wrong.
That's TULLE.
Yeah.
And it's that iconic pastoral scene
With the lady in the dress,
the
like
little
on a
milkmaid
swing.
and the guy playing the violin
Yeah.
under the tree where they're having the picnic with the cows grazing in the pasture. That's that stuff, and I love that stuff.
Yeah.
People
and it
love
sells like crazy.
French country.
Yeah.
It's really French country.
It's very popular right now.
And it's very popular, and it's a nice pattern to use in small areas. But I found this piece again looking in the corners. Normally the fabric is in a specific area in the thrift stores that I go to, and this one time, of course, I was on my way out of the store. I see this big thing in a plastic bag, and it's all stapled together where you can't look and see what's inside. And it was folded inside out. So all I saw was this huge bag of what I thought was cream-colored fabric. But I could see a little corner, and I could see that it was black and white toile. And I thought...
Black and white's nice.
I thought, I don't care what this is. It's $6. There's got to be at least 7 yards here.
Oh,
I'm
man.
buying it.
Yeah.
So I get it home, I unwrap it, and I discover that the toile pattern, instead of being a vertical pattern... running the vertical length of the fabric is a horizontal pattern, which means you could do a couch and the pattern of the toile would run horizontally along the back of the couch.
Yeah.
And I thought,
That's
is
cool.
really different. It sold very quickly at a high price.
So how do you sell the fabric? I mean, the way we do it is, especially if it's just pieces, we just do it common sense. You just take it out and you just measure it by inches, because often it's under
a yard. Yeah.
And even if it's been a piece that someone's kind of cut in a weird way, we'll just measure
the usable part.
a usable part, and then just sell the rest as extra. Right. And then how do we price it? You just gonna...
A lot of times I go by like a general, it depends on what it is. If it's wool, I'm thinking, minimum $10 a yard. Right. But probably more than that, depending
on the pattern.
I've sold 2 yards for $50 easy. Right. I mean, that's like not that much fabric, but it's a beautiful tartan plaid wool.
Right.
That everybody wants to make pillows out of.
Yeah, I do the same. I try to make with the smaller. Sometimes I just find an unusual piece of flannel, and I think this would just make adorable pajamas if somebody wanted to do it. And I sell those for less because it was a Joanne fabric designed piece. They actually have people designing fabric for them.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it'll say on the selvage. It'll say designed for Joanne Fabrics, and they have some pretty cool prints and things.
The selvage is that side part that a lot of times, like you said, sometimes it has the date, the name of the designer. Those are rare. I find it's rare to have that identification, but it's golden because you can see if that's been discontinued or if it's a really high price. But
but a really nice piece of wool, I want to get $10 to $20 a yard.
10 to 20. Depending on what the pattern is.
And the thing about wool is you have to hold that piece of wool up to the light, and you've got to make sure there are no moth holes. Because I had a really nice piece the other day, and I was measuring it out, and I have a really bright light, and I hold it up as best I can. Sometimes it's heavy and big, but I try to hold it up against the light because you'll see little pinholes, and I do disclose that. I try to show where those holes are.
I've never done that. I just looked on the surface, so it makes more sense to hold it up.
But you can't actually see some of those
the little
holes.
ones.
And you can cut around that if you're doing a garment. If you're not doing a garment and you want pillows, it might be harder.
Yeah.
But the other things that sell really well are the sari silks. I find a lot of
Indian
that they make saris out of.
Yeah.
So it has a border print, and they're usually beautiful colors, and they're almost always silk, and those are really nice, and they're light and easy to ship. But I also sell old curtain panels as fabric.
Yes.
And I might even list them in 2 categories because I might find a bark cloth curtain panel from the 50s that has an amazing pattern on it, but nobody's going to hang one panel.
They just want to make a pillow or a seat cover,
I tell people unusual shower curtains, not the plastic kind, obviously.
Yeah,
but even tablecloths that have a stain on them, you can cut them into pieces and make them into things.
Yeah. Why don't we talk about this? So, I mean, we've been talking about just it's fabric.
Right.
But then you open our eyes to, in these same, like, hidden corners, and often it's just put in with the fabric, will be curtains or
balances
or
whatever,
it's
panels.
Little tiny curtains up above. They aren't supposed to be.
They're like
the
decorative
thing.
almost,
And napkins and tablecloths.
All kinds of linens. Even sheets. We sell sheet sets.
I sell sheet
sets.
Yeah.
What do you call them? Like a plate? What do you?
Oh, like a placemat or a table runner.
Yeah. I mean,
all of that stuff.
All that stuff sells. Especially, we can find stuff that's really cool. I mean, things where someone did needlepoint,
hands.
on them.
I found a week ago in the tea towels. I always look in the tea towels because one of the things that I find that people seem to really like are the souvenir linen tea towels from foreign countries.
Yes.
One thing I found a couple of months ago was it's 3 really big linen towels from Australia, and they have these beautiful screen prints of Australian animals on them. They're stunning.
You would want to frame them.
You would frame them.
Yeah, you would frame them.
And I can get anywhere from $12 to $30. And that's another one of those undervalued things at the thrift store. Like, we just put these up for $1. I buy them for $1 to $2 a piece.
Yeah. Right.
And they've never been used because they're too beautiful and nobody wants to use them.
Right. Now, we have kind of gotten away from like tablecloths and napkins because we were getting them and we wouldn't always check them over
They're
well
stained.
enough.
Yeah,
and
they
have
got
some stains on them. Did you find that people still buy that stuff?
I won't buy them. I will not buy them for resale if they're badly stained.
Yeah.
I will tell you one quick story. I went to a yard sale a couple of years ago. It was a great yard sale. And there were tubs and tubs and tubs of linens. Well, they had been very badly stored, and they were so stained with that brown,
it's almost like rust. I mean, they call it rust, don't they?
Well, you know what it is? It's pollution. It's what I call pollution. And it comes from items being stored in a damp place. If you're lucky, there's no mildew. If there's mildew, you're in trouble. But these just had brown pollution along the fold lines.
Yeah.
Well, I took a chance and I bought a huge stack of tablecloths, some of the most beautiful vintage tablecloths I've ever seen. Some of them had never been used, but they were still stained.
Yeah.
Not stained from grease, which is hard to get out. It took me 2 weeks to remedy. You would never know that these cloths were as stained as they were. They look pristine.
How'd you do it? OxyClean?
I did it with OxyClean. I have a big laundry tub.
This is not an advertisement.
I put a very strong solution of OxyClean. I'm talking about I put an entire cup or 2 cups of Oxy. And what's interesting about Oxy is if it's a cotton tablecloth dyed in many different colors, the Oxy will not cause the dye to fade, which is key.
Is it a hydrogen peroxide like powder?
Yes,
right.
Basically. So it's not a bleach,
right?
And I put the hottest water I can stand. I mean, you're taking a risk anytime you do this with linens, but the cottons and the rayons and the linens will hold up.
Yeah.
And I soaked this one particular one that's really unique. I soaked it 3 or 4 times for several days at a time and just kept changing the water. And eventually it just came out pristine. It was amazing. So it was worth it. But it was work. I mean, it's...
Yeah.
So the other thing is, like, in the comments, people will, and I think it starts to become a little bit of, it's fear-mongering. Unless, I guess it happens. They talk about moths and bed bugs.
Oh, my God.
Infecting your inventory.
I mean, maybe just because we've been lucky, but, we've been buying at thrift stores, all kinds of thrift stores. We've never had any problems with moths or bringing home anything.
I had a moth infestation in New Bedford, and what happened was And I had no idea that that moth that was flying around in my store was a wool moth. I didn't know what a wool moth was. But as much wool as we all sell and store, it's like Walmart for moths.
But do you think it came from a store, or do you think it just crawled in?
No, I think it just came in the window.
Okay.
I didn't know what it was.
Right.
Yeah.
And when I packed to move to the house I live in now, I was packing each garment individually, and I would find 3 or 4 sweaters, and what happens is it's not the moth that's eating the sweater.
The larva.
The larva.
The moth lays the egg. The larvae, when it comes out of the egg or whatever that thing is eating the sweater. And I'm telling you. So usually what would happen is there would be one sweater that was badly eaten, and then a sweater on either side of that sweater that was somewhat eaten.
But I mean, are there like little worms on the sweaters?
They're worms.
Ooh, yeah.
And they're
they
tiny.
Like little maggots?
They're just tiny,
they're small,
they're
though. I mean, I've seen
tiny
them.
little white worms. And once they're gone, because then they turn into a moth and fly away.
Right.
But once they're gone, they leave what I call trailings. And those trailings look like tiny little short silk threads. So you look at it and you see this little white silk thread and you go, oh, wait a minute, that's a trailing. Once you see one, you know what it looks like. Every single piece that I found that was affected, I sealed in a plastic garbage bag and threw it out. Then I bought a freezer, and I froze the only way you can kill them without pesticides is to freeze them
now,
to kill the larvae.
When you realized that you did have an infestation, did you then see them everywhere, like a moth flying around?
No.
It's like
I
very
rarely,
minimal, right?
I would, I saw maybe 2 moths
Yeah.
over a 4-month period.
Wow.
And then I found the damage.
Huh.
So when I moved to the new house.
So, I mean, where would the moths go? Because, I mean, the babies turn into moths. I mean, where
they
would
just fly away.
But, I mean,
They
if
fly
it's in a
out of
sealed
your
basement,
house?
I mean, where does it go?
Oh, no, it wasn't in my house. It was in the mill where I had my store.
I got
so
you.
this
So,
is
this was a
So it could have
40,000
come
square
from
foot.
someone else's.
Oh,
place.
absolutely.
Okay, I got you.
The bed bug thing I've never experienced, thank God. But anything that was suspicious that I brought home, I put in my freezer for 24 hours.
Yeah.
And I've been really careful.
Yeah.
Now.
So, are you ever afraid? Because, I mean, when you shop at a thrift stores, are you afraid of buying
Yes.
stuff?
I do look at things very carefully. I mean, if there's an active infestation, you'll see it. I mean, there's a worm there and it's eating.
I mean, I'm surprised that. I mean, I guess that's why I don't get it's worried, because thrift stores are bringing stuff in all the time. I mean, it seems like if there was an infestation, it would just ruin their whole.
Well, I think there's
inventory.
enough turnover.
Yeah.
People are buying this
they
stuff,
buy
so
it.
the stuff's
Okay.
moving out. But I will tell you a funny story. I was in my favorite thrift store that I used to go into 3-4 times a week, and I'm standing in the women's suits, and it was summertime, and I kept feeling something biting me on my ankles. And I thought, oh my God, there are fleas in here, and I'm horribly allergic to fleas. So I went and got the manager who I knew, and I said to her, listen, I'm not going to say this out loud, but I said,
There are fleas.
There are fleas in here. And she said, oh, thank you for letting me know. She said, we'll call the exterminator. And they knew that had happened before, and they came in and I guess did whatever they had to do. But
Right.
I was literally standing in the clothing section being bitten, thinking, I gotta get out of here.
Yeah, don't buy anything on that rack.
Yeah, I'll be back in a week.
Yeah.
For those of us that have pets, there's nothing worse than a flea infestation.
Oh, it's horrifying.
Yeah,
It's
been
awful.
there.
And
Yeah.
it makes you just want to just sell the house. You're just like, let's just sell this house.
yeah.
now.
Or light a match.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know.
burn it down. Yep.
You know, it's interesting. We were at IKEA, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and we talk about it's kind of come back where people are starting to make clothes again and make things.
Yeah.
They have a beautiful area where you can buy
fabric.
and really cool designs. It's almost like, because I'll think, what stuff is being made now where if I bought in bulk and that's the kind of
kept it.
stuff that would be worth a lot.
And I was looking, well, I'll tell you this quick story. I bought a couple of pieces of fabric, and I really didn't look closely at them. I just loved the patterns, and I bought them at a thrift store, and I got them home. And they were vintage IKEA fabric from 1999 or something.
Yeah, that's great.
They sold so quickly at such a good
vintage
price.
IKEA stuff
because they only make the patterns for a year and then they're gone. So every time I go to IKEA, I go to their fabric department and I look for stuff on sale. But the reality is, the stuff on sale isn't cheap.
Right.
No.
So it's almost like you'd have to buy a whole. There's another designer from like maybe the 80s. It's Mary Mako.
Mary Mako.
Marimekko.
And I always think that's a person, but it's the name of a company.
Right. And they did a lot of textiles.
And that's coming back.
I think like it's Norwegian or something.
It's Scandinavian. And those were so popular in the 70s.
It's bright colors.
Right.
And
abstract.
big bold flowers.
Right.
And
I always look for that stuff.
You had Mary Mako sheets. It's really weird because I was looking up Mary Mako stuff because we had a small bolt of fabric that sold for a crazy price. It was copyright 1969 on it. Yeah, it was amazing. But I was looking up fabrics and people were like, vintage 70s Mary Mako sheets. And I had this like flashback to this like photograph of us, like me as a baby and my brother who's like funny. 2 or whatever in your bed, and you had Mary Mako sheets because I was like, those are the sheets.
I probably did.
Like probably everybody had them back then.
My other favorite designer, and I buy anything of hers that I find, I buy, and it always sells, and that's Vera.
Just Vera.
Well, it's just Vera, but her name was Vera Newman. And
I do too buy that now.
The early stuff, and it's interesting because I'll see some stuff and I'll go, wow, that doesn't even look like a Vera.
Right.
She was so prolific. And her napkins and tablewares, that's what she was really known for. But her scarves as well. I actually have a blouse that was designed by her.
She did a lot of scarves. Like if you go into a thrift store, an independent church thrift store, you will find a Vera scarf. Yeah. Like there's no.
So I think the way I explain to people about why are people buying this stuff, because the vintage, its fabric is such quality that's hard to find now, but you can find it. Like you guys went to that fabric store in that town where
next to the Amtrak station,
and so there are these places that you can buy fabric, but it's so expensive. So
it was over $100 a yard.
So talk about this. Who was he? He was like,
well, he was a guy from DC. So this is like 2 hours outside of DC in a little podunk town.
I think he was Italian.
Okay, but he had moved out of DC because it was too expensive. But he said his clients from DC, New York, wherever, they come see him.
Right, and they sell to designers.
Yeah,
and,
I'm sure they ship stuff to people.
And so
he sells all over the world.
So it's what I try and tell people is that the vintage stuff, people buy at such great prices because for them it's cheap compared to if you want to buy that quality now.
Right.
It's $100 or more a yard.
I saw $160 on some wool.
He had Burberry. He had
designer
he had
Versace wool.
He had Pucci. He had Gucci. He had everything.
Gucci.
I mean, his stuff was exquisite.
Yeah, it was so weird walking in there and being in this little town and seeing.
Well, I went in there to buy buttons.
Yeah.
And honestly, I bought 6 buttons. They were $18.
Wow.
For 6 buttons.
Right.
They're from Italy, and they're going on a gorgeous coat that I am going to sell. But that's what I saw the buttons in the window, and I said, "Oh, I need to go in this button shop." I had no idea what he had in there.
We were,
and again, and that's my point is that when we say we sell a vintage stuff, what that means to me is that we sell quality. And the vintage stuff normally is quality. Is that's just what people made back then.
Right.
And if you try and find that quality now, you can only find that craftsmanship and quality in
the high
designer stuff that costs so much money. So really, a vintage is really affordable.
Right. Well, for example, I'll talk about when I was a girl growing up. If you bought a Talbot's coat, that coat was pure wool. The workmanship was extraordinary. I'm talking about something that I would buy in the 60s. and you could wear that coat for the rest of your life if you took care of it and kept it clean and blah blah blah. That coat would never go out of style. You would have it forever. You buy a coat now, and even if you pay $100 for it,
the button falls off.
It lasts 5 years if you're lucky.
Lucky. You know, at the end of a year, you know, the elbows are starting to look worn. The cuffs are frayed. The button fell off. It's just not there. People who know quality garments and know what the workmanship was like, they're going to buy that vintage garment.
Right.
I have a Talbot's and a Ralph Lauren, actually, blue woman's blazer with the big embroidered crest on them. They're gorgeous. I'm keeping one for myself.
Yeah,
because with a pair of skinny jeans and a white shirt, all day long you can wear that.
So yesterday, I just wanted to bring this story up. We were at a thrift store here in New York City, and
Housing Works for those of you.
Housing Works for the New Yorkers. You know who I'm talking about. You missed out on this sale. Jay was very good at finding stuff.
I was looking in the corners.
You were looking in the corners. I was looking at the shoes, and they were so high priced, I was dying. But Jay brings this piece of ugly corduroy fabric. I mean, I was just like, "What? This looks like junk to me."
It's just like olive green corduroy fabric.
Right.
Yeah.
So it has the original tag from the designer, and it's this like Italian, super high end. It was 4 yards. It had the original price tag on it. The original price tag was $2,200 for 4 yards, and we were like, should we get this? Oh, yes, we should get this away.
I don't think we're going to sell it for $2,200.
No, but
we bought it for $70, and you know we'll get at least $400 or $500. You know?
But I guess my story is like it's hard to ever see those original price tags. So you're like, somebody bought this.
Yeah.
Corduroy fabric, didn't use it, but look at the price they paid.
Yeah. Plus, it was nice too because it had the tags that said what it was made out of, and it's a cotton silk blend.
It's beautiful,
and it has the Made in Italy stamp on it.
Everything,
and plus it's got that thing on the side.
What is it called?
That's the selvage.
Selvage.
The selvage is the edge of the fabric that's
finished off,
so the fabric doesn't unravel.
And a lot of times it has the printing on it, so it had that printing. So I guess the point of the story is people who are designers, I mean, someone was willing to pay thousands of dollars for 4 yards of corduroy fabric.
Right.
You're giving them a deal if you're selling it to them for, $400 or whatever. Yeah. I'll give it to you for $1,000.
Well, it's beautiful. And somebody will make a jacket or a beautiful trousers from that and wear them forever.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, and I just want to say a word about Harris tweed.
Sure. Yes.
Okay, so we've all gone through the Harris tweed phase, and honestly...
Harris tweed blazer phase.
Harris tweed sports coat phase. Yeah. Okay, so we went through that. I have 20 or 30 Harris tweed jackets in my inventory right now. None of them are listed. I've been racking my brain about actually deconstructing them and selling them for that fabric.
That's a great idea.
However, I got the latest Travel Smith catalog, and guess what, folks? Harris tweed sports coats are back in fashion.
You gotta get the 3-button one.
And they are being sold for, in Travel Smith, this year's inventory, $439.
Wow. What? I just think like Harris Tweed's it's one of those brands where there's it's been around for so long, the quality is up and down. Some of a 3-button, the older kind with a leather buttons, those are beautiful.
The real leather
but
buttons.
Then there are like the kind of the cheaply made
the
sports
80s
coats
look,
that like aren't
shoulders.
fully lined and they feel a little cheaper.
Like the fabric is okay, but it's the cut is ugly.
So it is, but we've done what you just talked about. It's not so popular, but it was a way for us to unload stuff. Is that we realized we had all these like cheap Harris tweed ones, or these wool sweaters that had some holes in them, or skirts, wool skirts that just weren't really
had
that
so
nice.
Many of them, but they're tartan plaid.
We started to sell those in lots
as fabric.
And we call them cutter fabric.
Right. Yeah. And that's the key search word.
Right.
Is that
cutter fabric.
So people, I mean, like I said, this is not a money maker.
It's more getting rid of the junk that you bought by accident,
Right.
Yeah.
But we've done well. I mean, those cutter fabric skirts, people love those for, like we said, making pillows, making little curtains, making quilts and blankets and things like that.
One of my favorite projects is I love little benches and footstools.
Yes.
That's just a piece of furniture that I'm always attracted to because they can serve so many purposes. And you can take a piece of tartan plaid that's only 24 inches by 40 inches, and you can upholster a footstool.
Yeah.
And the other thing I do with my fabric when I list it is I try to give the buyer a sense of what this fabric could be used for. And I always talk about the weight of the fabric.
Yes, you have to talk about the weight.
Because just looking at a picture, it's impossible to tell how this
that's if it's
feels.
Upholstery versus dress versus...
I will say, for example, pinpoint Oxford fabric with a whale print, suitable for blouses, dressmaking, lightweight curtain, tablecloth.
Not like a seat.
Right. If it's upholstery or drapery, I'll say it's appropriate for chair seats, curtains, blah, 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 pillow covers, to give people a sense of, okay, this is heavy enough to take the wear of a chair seat. And I think the more information you can give them about how the fabric can be used is important, because some people just don't know, or they're
you can't tell from the photos either. Like you said, I try to do lightweight, medium weight, or heavy.
Right.
Just to give people the sense, it's heavy upholstery fabric, or it's lightweight, it's for a skirt.
Although that does get us into a bind sometimes, because we had a woman write us, can I make this into a dress?
Right.
And I think we told her she could.
Right. Because it was a raw silk. Yeah. I was like, you could.
But then that's tough, and then she got it, and she didn't agree, and then she sent it back. So sometimes we kind of are back and forth whether or not we want to.
That's why I try to say lightweight, medium weight, heavy.
Right.
And if it's for dressmaking, I will say, suitable for dressmaking. Right. But the other thing I've done, and I don't really mind doing this if I think the person's a serious buyer, is I will send them a swatch.
Ooh, I don't do it.
No.
I don't do it. I'm just like, I'm not going to cut this fabric.
Well, when I say a swatch, I mean a tiny little strip off the end.
Yeah.
But see, all my stuff's in storage in another building. I'm just like, nope.
I think we've only done that a couple times when it's been like 10 yards and someone's going to pay us $400.
Exactly.
We don't want to fool around.
I'm not going to, if it's a 1 yard piece, I'm not going to do it. But if it's a large quantity and they want to
try
and they want to see the color, because I find that people look at things and they go, oh, that wasn't the same color.
Because of their computer monitor, mostly.
And it looks very accurate on mine, but...
I had this lady who wanted this huge bolt of fabric, and she kept giving me this story over and over and over, and she kept asking me, and finally I was like, all right, I'll send her a little sample, Never heard from her. It's like, oh, lady, you're killing me.
So let's wrap this up. I would say for someone hearing this and they're like, okay, I'm
going for it.
I say do what we did. I mean, that's one reason why we had gone to that small fabric store, is we just went in there and just start feeling the fabric.
Yeah, right. And looking at the fiber content.
Yeah. Look at the prices.
Plus, if it's a small independent place, the owner very often is probably very proud to tell you what's going on.
Everybody is happy to share their knowledge if they think it's going to result in a sale, for sure.
But I bet you could even go to Michael's and start just feeling the fabric, as long as you just read, silk, whatever, wool.
Right. Yeah.
There's a website about fabrics, and I believe there's a website about, I've lost my train of thought, but...
Like the plaids, the tartan.
The tartans.
Oh, the tartans. I gave you guys that link, right?
A tartan encyclopedia or something.
Right. And that actually is a store in Scotland where you can order kilts from them. Yeah. And it was amazing because you could search the tartan by the color combination that you had. So if it was yellow and black and red...
You could say the clan it was from, because...
Right.
And I guess that is something we should include here. Tartan plaids are very
popular
to find, because people will buy those, and if you can say the clan, because people who have Scottish backgrounds, they
search for their last name,
skirts or whatever. Because
and sometimes the tartans, the actual clan, it goes by 2 or 3 different names. I don't know if the clan had different branches.
And also there's names. Stewart, dress Stewart, royal Stewart.
Right,
Like there's
right.
like different versions
Right.
of it. Yeah.
But I
fun.
love the tartan plaids.
They're gorgeous.
I
very
love-
trendy.
Yeah.
They're very fashionable beyond people who are
Well, and
Scottish.
it goes to that whole lodge look that's really popular right
Yeah.
now. And that's why I thought the Harris tweeds would be great to sell as fabric because they
Yeah.
would make great pillow covers.
Right. I would love to
Sure.
keep the little Harris tweed,
Yeah.
label
Yeah.
and put it on the
Nice.
back.
Yeah.
That would look, or a purse or something.
Right.
I've seen people make purses out of them.
Well, I was thinking about doing little bags that you would maybe put your technology in.
Oh
to
yeah, like an
travel with,
iPad
like
case.
yeah,
oh,
I
that'd
mean,
be great.
and there's so many applications
Yeah.
for that stuff.
Yeah.
And look at Etsy. There's a whole. I mean, everybody on Etsy's making stuff out
Yeah,
of
that's true.
fabrics and leathers and.
Yep.
And I think
old
that's
sweaters.
and I think that's really helped with the fabric sales too. People are looking
Crafters.
for unique patterns. They're looking for specific fabrics.
Yep.
And what better product how much easier could it be? And, you take a half a dozen photographs. I try to take a series of photographs. I try to show the entire piece of fabric
Yeah.
from a distance so you get an idea of how big the pattern is, where the pattern is placed on the fabric. Then I do a series of photographs that get closer and closer and closer to
Right.
the surface. So here it is, 2 feet square, 1 foot square, 6
Well,
inches square.
Something that we do is I'll take a coin
Yes.
and put it on the
quarter.
pattern,
It's a good
so that
idea.
you can see, if it's a plaid, like how wide the
Right,
plaid.
yeah.
And I like to
Close.
do a very, very close-up shot to show the actual weave of the fabric.
Yes.
Because wools are so different. If it's a very open basket weave, you'll know
Right.
that it has more stretch to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good to show detailed photos of
Yeah.
that because, like we said, you're not sitting there with it in your hand. You're not feeling it, looking
Right.
at it,
Yeah.
moving it around. So I've had very, very little returns on fabric. I mean,
Yeah.
people who are into fabric, even if they're not going to use it for the
I
intended
don't think
purpose,
I've had any, actually.
Basically,
Very,
that
very little.
one that we mentioned
Yeah.
was,
But it is just amazing though on eBay how there's just that you can find a thing and just go so deep into it. Just like someone could be into video games or
Yep.
Yeah.
whatever, bike parts. You
Yeah.
just go real deep. And
And the other thing I discovered, and this was actually a buyer told me about it, I had sold her a Ralph Lauren bed skirt. And that was another one of those undervalued items.
It just
that
looks like
I
junk.
just-
Yeah.
there's hundreds of them, but I've gotten really good at finding the Ralph Laurens, the
Laura Ashley.
Ashleys,
Yep,
the
those sell.
Waverleys, the
Yeah.
bed skirts are really expensive.
Yeah.
I've never had a bed skirt. I wouldn't know what to do with a bed skirt.
Yeah.
But apparently a lot of people use them. So
Yeah.
anyway, long story. So this woman bought 2 Ralph Lauren bed skirts from me. And I said to her, I don't know what these are called, the pattern, because Ralph Lauren has
has patterns.
hundreds.
Yeah.
And it seemed like all the bed skirts that were listed said what the pattern was of the
You're
fabric.
like, how would I
and I
know
thought,
this?
how do they know this?
Yeah.
She says, oh, it's called the Bedding Library.
Ah.
And it's that website, and that's what it's called, thebeddinglibrary.com, is every known fabric that Ralph Lauren has made.
wow.
And the name of the pattern.
And the name of the pattern. And so you can...
That is obsessive.
you can search by florals, you can search by stripes, you can search
Yep.
by plaids, and then there's a whole page of unnamed patterns that nobody knows what they are.
Oh, that's
so if
interesting.
you know, people contribute to the website that way, but it really came in handy looking up stuff.
Yeah, because you want people to search if they're like, I need to match.
I need the Francesca.
one. Yeah, like that is.
I need the Brentwood jewel tone.
I mean, we joke about it, but that's why eBay works because there
Yeah.
are people out there looking for
Right,
very
specific things,
specific.
and there's nowhere else that they could go because
Right.
Yeah.
because retail stores don't hold that kind
Like
of
a
stuff,
discontinued
you know?
Ralph Lauren from like 1990.
Right.
Where are you
So-
going to find that?
Right.
eBay.
They go to eBay because
Yeah.
eBay is
Exactly.
the biggest flea market on the planet.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and people can say what they want, and I know there's been a lot of pressure on sellers now to conform to new rules, but Jay, you say it best. Put your head down and list.
Like
Yeah.
that's all you got to do.
That's all you can do.
As long as people are buying, like you can't really complain.
No, not at all.
Okay, thanks for
Thanks, Jenna. aka Mom.
You're welcome. Anytime, guys. Bye.